So you now have a better understanding of what the Azure AD Connect tool has to offer. The three components we talked about, the synchronization, ADFS, and the health. But what we're going to focus on in this particular course is the synchronization piece. And in preparation for the synchronization process, we want to make sure we're not synchronizing garbage. There's this old saying as a DBA, or garbage in, garbage out, or GJO. We have the same problem here. We could be transferring thousands of objects in this synchronization process that are just garbage. So let's look at what we can do to clean up our Active Directory on-premises environment. And what do I mean by cleanup? Well, we've got some restrictions, or we have some requirements. The first one is the UPN suffixes. They have to have valid characters. Those valid characters include letters, numbers, dashes, and underscores. So no apostrophes, no dollar signs, no ampersands, nothing like that. So we have to make sure the UPN suffixes only contain these types of characters. The other thing we need to do on-prem is to make sure we're at the correct forest functional level. Now, there's support for 2003 and higher. But 2003, there's some restrictions, and you're going to lose some of the functionality that's provided by Azure AD. So that's why I've written this up as the forest functional level of 2008 or higher. One of the things or features that you would lose is the password write back, where if I made a change to my password in Office 365, it's not going to report that change back to on-prem. Well, that's huge. So even though the documentation says 2003 is okay, we don't want okay. We want to make sure we're getting the full functionality out of this tool. So I'm going to suggest that you have your forest functional level of 2008 or higher. We can't have any duplicates of user principal names or proxy address attributes. So we have to check for that and make sure that's all cleaned up. In addition, if we're going to be migrating or synchronizing groups, the group account attributes must be populated. And there's three in particular. The first one is the members. The second is alias, and the third is display names. All of these have to be populated for my groups, or the synchronization won't take place. So these are some of the suggestions for cleaning up the content on-prem before you attempt a synchronization, so that A, doesn't fail completely, or B, you discover you're not getting all of the content. You're not receiving that content. Now, there's good news about this Active Directory cleanup, and the good news is we have some tools to work with. The tools that we are going to be working with, the first one is called the ID Fix. You can download this from the Microsoft website. This is going to go out there. It's going to identify errors that would occur during the synchronization. It's going to look for the duplicates. It's going to look for any formatting problems in your directory. And it's going to do this prior to the synchronization to Office 365. And in some cases, depending on what the problem is or the error is, it may even try to tweak that for you. So what you want to do is search for ID Fix. And by the way, this has been around for a while. So don't be surprised if you see an article from Microsoft that's back from 2015 or even earlier. And download it from a Microsoft website so you know you have a valid tool. Another one's called the admodify.net. This is an older tool as well, and it's used to bulk change either Exchange attributes as well as Active Directory users and computers attributes. So if we identify some attributes that aren't going to meet the requirements for the synchronization to occur correctly, we can then use this tool for changing those attributes. The final one that we have is the Synchronization Rules Editor. This also is downloadable. You can just go in and do a search and you'll find this. And this is a tool that's quite powerful in the sense it gives you some options for managing your Active Directory on-prem and helping you ensure that it's ready for that synchronization. So add these three tools to your toolbox on-prem, and after doing so, you'll be confident that the synchronization will take place correctly. A few more items about the ID Fix tool because it's probably one of the most commonly used tools. First off, you have to locate it, download it, and install it. And like I said, Google, Bing it, whatever you want to do, and find it. And make sure you're just grabbing it from a Microsoft website. Because as I mentioned, it identifies potential sync problems, including the duplicates, formatting, and it attempts to repair any objects that may cause the synchronization to fail. Now this tool has some hardware requirements. 4 gigs of RAM is one of them, and the second one is 2 gigabytes of disk space, so not a big deal. Software requirements, a domain joined computer, which means the computer you're going to run this tool from has to be part of the domain that you're going to be performing the synchronization from. And the other one is to have the .NET Framework 4.0 installed And if you're running Windows Server 2008 or higher, the .NET Framework 4.0 is probably already installed for you. Just double check to make sure you're good. Now, I mentioned previously that not every domain could synchronize. Those are those non-routable domain names. A couple of examples of these, as you can see here, are pluralsight.local or microtechpoint.private. You type either of these in and you attempt to use DNS to resolve these names, it's not going to happen. So what we need to do is make sure we have the synchronization requirements, and that is the ability to route from a private to a public domain, and that all the accounts have a public user principal name suffix or UPN suffix. And if they don't, let's say for instance we're using an internal microtechpoint.local and now we're trying to synchronize, well, it's not going to work. So what we need to do is we need to modify the UPN suffixes for all those users who are using that internal non-routable domain. And what we'll do is go in through the Active Directory domains and trust, and in there we can add the UPN suffix. I'll show you where to do this in just a little bit here. We can also go in and update user accounts in the Active Directory users and computers, but that could be a bit tedious and it could be a bit of a lengthy project if we have to do that for every account. So what we would do as an alternative is use PowerShell, because we can update multiple accounts using PowerShell, and you're going to use a command to go out and grab the AD users that have a user principal name suffix that's non-routable, and then you're going to use a for each command in there along with the set-AD user, and you're going to set the user principal names for all those users who had that local or non-routable domain associated with it. And we can also use the set-MSOL user principal name to assign a new UPN. Now, one question I often see is, well, what about my .onmicrosoft.com? Is that a routable domain? Well, yeah, of course it is. If I can type in Brian at microtechpoint.onmicrosoft.com and DNS recognizes that, that's a routable domain because the name is being resolved by DNS, so it's going to be able to respond to requests or accept emails, whatever the situation may be. It's those .privates, .locals, .mtp, .old, or any other UPN suffix that DNS wouldn't recognize. In addition to non-routable domains, we also want to control what objects are being synchronized. We want to filter objects that are being synced because we want to avoid syncing all objects from your on-prem Active Directory environment. So often when we're looking at setting up a synchronization process, we're going to start out with a small pilot of users. We're not going to say, all right, I got 50,000 users, bam, let's make this happen. We're going to be able to filter out and determine what users are going to be synchronized. So to help filter the information that's being synchronized, we're going to begin with a small pilot to make sure the synchronization works as expected. We can specify we only want to sync user accounts. Remember, we don't want the service accounts as an example. Our synchronization requirements may be based on auditing or compliance. And we can specify we only want to bring in active accounts. We don't want to bring any disabled accounts. We don't want to bring in any service accounts. We want to minimize the number of items being synchronized. And we can set up the filtering by OU, groups, domains, or attribute based, or a combination of these. I can go into a multi-domain forest and say I only want accounts from domain A within the organization unit called active users within a specific group, and also specify an attribute of the members of that group of the OU from that domain. So we can get very granular when we are configuring the filtering for the Active Directory synchronization. Now, there are some assumptions associated with the Azure AD Connect when it comes to the synchronization process. First off, our goal is for each user to have only one enabled account. Secondly, each user is going to have only one mailbox. The third assumption is the forest hosting the mailboxes is going to have the best data value for the user's attributes. So if there's any confusion or conflict, it'll look at the attributes in the Global Exchange address list. And the fourth one, if there's more than one active account or mailbox, the sync engine is going to pick one. It's going to ignore the rest of them. And another criteria is any linked mailbox without an active account won't even be synced to Azure AD. And for additional information on these assumptions, search for Azure AD Connect topologies to provide the details around these assumptions.